In this video, we'll review 4 types of adjective clauses that give even high-level writers trouble sometimes. This builds on a previous video about basic adjective clauses, subject focus and object focus, with their essential and non-essential variations. So if you feel like you need to review those basics, you might want to go back and watch that video or check a good reference grammar book. The famous American writer Mark Twain said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." Now you know that Mark Twain was a colorful character, and even though he used ain't here, you know we don't really consider that appropriate for academic use. So what does this quote have to do with adjective clauses? These are structures that seem so basic that my students often say, "I've studied adjective clauses a lot before. I know all about them." And yet I still see a lot of glitches and problems in their writing involving them. So let's take a look at some of those tricky ones. Here's some everyday examples of the 4 types of clauses we'll look at. The first is possessive. For example, James is the neighbor whose car we borrowed. Next is an adjective clause with a preposition. This is the city in which we live. The third one uses an expression of quantity along with the relative pronoun. The test seemed hard to the students, many of whom were not well prepared. And finally, the last example uses which to refer back to a whole idea or main clause that precedes it. Mohammed was accepted by his favorite university, which made him very happy. The first type with whose is very common in both speech and writing, but the last 3 would be mostly used in writing or sometimes in formal speech. Before we move on into a basic structure review of each one, let's take a look at how they might show up in an academic text. A possessive example: a society is a group of people whose members interact, reside in a definable area, and share a culture. And a preposition example: a sociologist might study how migration determined the way in which language spread and changed over time. This slide shows a quantifier and a whole idea example that are a bit longer. So I'll give you a moment to read those to yourself, and you might want to pause the slide to take a little more time if you need it. But try to understand how the adjective clause meaning connects to the main clause. Let's look at the clauses that use possessives in a little more detail. Some points to remember are that the word whose should be connected to a noun and used together with it as a unit. Whose is usually used for people, but you'll also see it being used to refer to things. For example, you might hear the car whose engine doesn't start, or a paraphrase of that would be the car with the engine that doesn't start. Whose can be used in both essential clauses without commas that limit a noun's meaning, and in non-essential clauses with commas that elaborate or give extra information about the noun's meaning. And a very common error is using the spelling of the contraction whose, which means either who is or who has, rather than the possessive relative pronoun whose, W-H-O-S-E. And native speakers make this mistake a lot. It happens because the pronunciation of the 2 forms is exactly the same in speech. Try this self-check. Combine the 2 sentences to make a sentence with a possessive adjective clause. And remember to keep the pronoun whose together with its noun. Here's the answer. Did you use the word his in your answer? I hope not, because its meaning is replaced by the pronoun whose, so we don't need it anymore. A common error would be to use the pronoun who and keep the rest of the clause the same, but this doesn't work. Take a moment to read these 2 academic examples and notice that the first one is an essential clause without a comma, and the second one is a non-essential clause with a comma before it, and a period at the end because it falls at the end of a sentence. And also interesting is that neither of these is actually referring to people, but to animals and to a zoo. And you may want to pause to read this. The next slide looks at clauses with prepositions. And you'll see many different prepositions used, but some very common ones are by, with, to, from, and about. They may occur in both essential and non-essential clauses. And be aware that there are some variations on word order in this type of clause, but here we're just going to treat the basic structure. The relative pronouns that follow the preposition must be in object form, and that limits them to whom for people and which for things. So don't use that or omit the relative pronoun when you write this type of clause. The people with whom we met and the background from which he came are essential clauses, and Professor Williams, to whom I spoke, and their poor performance, about which he felt strongly, would be non-essential clause examples. Now check yourself with this example, and be careful how you position the clause in your sentence. Remember that the preposition relative pronoun combination should come closely after the noun it describes. And the answer, did you get it right? A common error would be to put who the university received a large donation from him, which doesn't work as an adjective clause structure. We need to use the relative pronoun whom after the preposition from, and this gives the meaning of him. Take a moment now to pause and look at how this may occur in some academic text examples. And there are multiple adjective clauses here that don't need prepositions for their meanings. These are the ones highlighted in blue, but the ones in red require the prepositions to get their meaning right. Next are the clauses that use a quantifier or quantity expression along with the relative pronoun to express the amount or number of something. And these are always non-essential clauses which require the use of commas. The relative pronouns that you can use here are limited to which for things and whom for people because they have to be in object form to follow the preposition of. Check yourself on this example. Did you get it? Again, sometimes people try to write this type of clause using the relative pronoun who, and this is a common mistake. Read through these academic examples to better understand what these clauses look like in action. And here are two more examples that illustrate some more variations on quantifiers. The first sentence uses parentheses instead of commas in order to use the clause as a kind of side comment to his main point. So read that one. And in the second one, the expression, the last two of which, adds information about order to the quantity expression. So please read that one. Finally, read this short paragraph context and notice how the clause combines both a quantifier and a possessive. And notice how the sentence fits into the longer context. And you may want to pause for this one. Our fourth and last tricky clause structure doesn't require a lot of explanation. Just use which when you want to make a clause that refers back to a whole idea rather than just to a single referent noun. It's always considered non-essential, and it requires the use of commas. Check yourself on it. And here's the answer. Simple, huh? And the most common error here is probably just omitting the comma punctuation that's needed there. And here's an academic example of this one. So that's it for the tricky adjective clauses. And if you feel that you need to consult a good grammar resource for more information on these structures, I would recommend the following book, Understanding and Using English Grammar by Betty S.R. and Stacy Hagen. Thanks for watching, and good luck with your adjective clauses.